Hi, I'm Nick from Acting Coach Scotland, and today I'm going to talk to you about common mistakes that are made in monologue auditions. So these are things that go wrong that you should avoid. And one of the biggest issues is that you don't really have a great frame of reference. So you might have seen monologues performed on Netflix or Amazon Prime, and you're trying to emulate what goes on there, and there's a massive problem with that. So to give an illustration, your typical monologue in your average TV show will be something like this. The actor will stare meaningfully into the middle distance, and then they'll just have a very sort of slightly concerned face and a gentle, steady tone and pace that doesn't really vary. And that means they're being meaningful and thoughtful. Well, it doesn't work. It's boring. To which you might argue, well, if that's the case, how come I see it all the time? Well, it's because of editing. So the director will say in the edit, okay, we've got to do something to make the tension arrive. So we're going to do some fast cuts with the camera. We're going to underpin that monologue with some string music. We're going to show the trembling of the shutters from the storm, or the cigarette smoke spiralling up from the cigarette. All of that is to create dramatic tension and variety where there is none in the actor's performance. And in an audition situation, you can't do that because, well, you can do it, but it's boring. In an audition, you don't have the lighting, you don't have the other actor to bounce off, you don't have the camera edits, you don't have the underpinning of sound and music, you don't have all that help to give you the dramatic tension that your story needs. And it's not much different for theatre either, if you think about it. So in the context of a play, if your character's performing a monologue, you might get away with something that is flat and metronomic because the audience have been with you for an hour. They're rooting for your character and they understand everything you've been through before that point, so they'll be much more patient with you. That's not to say it's going to be terribly interesting, but you'll get away with it. In a monologue audition, most of the time you're walking into a room which is not fit for that purpose. It doesn't have the lighting, you don't have all these added extras. So you've got to create an atmosphere in your storytelling that engages the listener and engages the audition panel. So what does that mean? Well, most people's energy or intensity doesn't change enough. So you've got to think about how can you vary your energy or your intensity during the monologue. There's a way to do it. It's not actually that complicated. There's a framework you can use, but most actors don't know about it or don't think about it clearly enough. They get too trapped in their characterization to think about technically putting in shifts in energy or intensity. One huge problem, and this is the biggest problem that I experience from auditions, that an actor will recognise a particular emotion that's prevalent in the monologue, usually near the end, and they'll recognise that emotion as being quite strong, and then they'll start there. So you tend to get, let's say, for example, your character is vengeful or jealous, you could say overall, at the peak of the drama of the story. Well, if you start there, you've got nowhere to go. Well, you could start there, but you've got to go somewhere different before you finish the story. So again, in the same way that you get this metronomic flat tone of energy and lack of intensity and energy, you have the same problem with your emotional journey because it tends to be flat as well. One of the other big problems that you'll get is that your monologue, you've practiced it so many times, you know it so well. If you're not careful, it can sound like a speech. You've got to remember that your character doesn't know what they're going to say next, unless it's pre-prepared, unless the character is delivering a pre-prepared speech, of course. But you don't know what's coming next, so you've got to allow thinking in between your thoughts, in between what you're saying. You've got to have new thoughts that come clearly, and you've got to link them internally. We've got to see that process happening. Otherwise, it just creates the impression that you've said this before and you know what you're going to say next. And again, that's not interesting. So that's a problem. The other problem is that it doesn't seem in your monologue necessarily like you're talking to someone, right? And that's such a simple thing to remember. You shouldn't think of a monologue as your character speaks for 2 to 3 minutes. You know, the character in the play doesn't say, or in the film or in the TV series doesn't say, can you just hang on a second? I'm going to talk for 2 to 3 minutes, and if you don't interrupt me, that'd be great, because I know exactly what I'm going to say. No, it's a conversation. They're usually trying to solve a problem. They're usually trying to share something important or reach some kind of important conclusion. And you should play it as if you're talking to somebody else, and they might interrupt you at any moment. If that sounds strange, think of it like this. How many times have you performed a monologue with a question in it, and you've never really asked the question? So, if you've got a question in your monologue, ask it, wait for an answer. When that answer doesn't come, then continue, but you have to use that, okay? So, treat a monologue as if it's a conversation between you and somebody else. They just happen not to be speaking. Another big issue that comes up quite regularly is that an actor will have a distance in the way they perform the monologue. They'll report it rather than relive it. And even if your character's talking about events that have happened in the past, as you're going through those events, you need to allow them to affect you now in the moment. So your audience and your audition panel needs to see how you're affected right now. So beware of reporting. And it's that kind of distancing that can happen sometimes. One of the things that are quite basic, but it's important to mention, is that you might choose the wrong monologue. All too often, if you've got a choice, of course. I mean, there's some auditions you're given the sides, but hopefully you'll put yourself up for it, or your agent will put yourself up for that, to put you up for that audition because it's right for you. But if you get to choose what you want to show people, you've really got to work to your strengths. You've really got to work to your default. Sometimes you might choose a monologue because that's the type of role that you would like to play, rather than the type of role that you're likely to be cast in. And that can be an issue because whoever's watching sees a disparity between that character and you, because it doesn't match. It doesn't match in their head, the casting type. The other big issue is that, really and truthfully, I'm not sure that actors are taught well enough how story works. Story, books, novels, plays, TV episodes, films. There are structures other than beginning, middle, and end, because hopefully we all understand that one. But more complex structures than that you need to understand, and you can apply those structures to your monologue to create the right story journey. So that covers the main mistakes that people make in performing their audition monologues. The good news is that all of these things can be fixed, and they can be fixed quite simply. I've developed a monologue system, which is a process, a repeatable process, so you can learn how to do it and you can apply it to any monologue, classic, contemporary, it doesn't really matter. And that can help you avoid all of those problems. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can send me an email to nick@actingcoachscotland.co.uk and I'll see if I can help you. All right.